Hi there, I'm Alex, the creator of Politics and War. It's the first of the month again, which means that donation limits are reset. But before I talk about that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and Politics and War. I started creating Politics and War when I was in high school at age 16. But to understand why, we have to take it back even further. When I was very young, around age 7, my older brother Michael showed me Game Maker, a program for making computer games. He helped me make my first game, Chester's Life, a platform game where you played as Chester, which is my cat's name, and you were stranded on Mars fighting aliens. I think this was the specific moment in my life when I developed a passion for making games. I've always loved to create, and I've also always liked politics and government, just as I know many of you do too. It wasn't long before I was scouring the internet looking for games where I could create my own country. In this search, I found Cybernations, a game many of you have probably played or heard of. Cybernations came out in 2006 and is a text-based game, much like Politics and War, where you get to create your own country. Now back in those days, this would have been around 2009 for me, we didn't have Discord. We had something called IRC, which was a much more basic chat platform. The game had its own IRC channel where players could all chat in real time. I remember vividly the day that I got banned from Cybernations. A user who called himself the Grinch came into the Cybernations channel and told everyone that he had hacked the game and that per the game rules you had an obligation to report that you had made contact with him, or else moderators would ban you. In hindsight, this was pretty silly, but I was like 12 at the time, and so I got on the Cybernations forum and I made a report to the mods about this user. Cybernations was supposed to have a 5 strikes and you're out moderation policy on their forum, but the mods looked at my post, overrode that, and straight up banned me from the game. They were not interested in appeals or explanations. They accused me of trolling the mods, even though I was just a kid and didn't understand what was going on. It was pretty much that day that I decided I would create my own Cybernations and make it better. I had no real programming experience other than Game Maker, which really didn't require any coding at all, and I still had no idea how I was going to do this. Still, I was determined, and I started Googling things like, how do I make a website? And that turned into, how do I let users register and log in? I had no money either, so I was using a free web hosting service called 000 Webhost, which gave you free web hosting for small projects. This was all even 3 or 4 years before I started Politics and War. But I was slowly learning what was involved in making the game, how web hosting worked, how basic scripts like user registration, logins, databases, etc. all fit together into a web application. I didn't even have an IDE, I was literally using Notepad and a web-based FTP text editor to write code. Between being banned from Cybernations and starting Politics and War, I probably started a dozen other games. Generally, some way into the project I would realize that I had made a big mistake and I would scrap it and start over with a new one. Each time this happened though, I learned more and I got a little bit better. Notably, in 2011 I created Pixelnations, which was the first game I made that had any success. Pixelnations is somewhat similar to Politics and War, and there are some really old YouTube videos out there that have some content on it if you're interested. I think at its height it had about 500 players. There were some pretty big issues with the game that I didn't really know how to fix though, so I ended up selling that game. I kinda took a break for a year or so. I thought I was done making these games, but over time that itch to create and that passion to build a better text-based nation sim took control of me. I was a junior in high school at this point, but I knew I wanted to try again with a new game. But I was struggling with my vision for what it should be, and in particular what it should be called. I was lying in bed one night with all these thoughts racing in my head when inspiration struck me. Cybernations, Pixelnations, and the game that I wanted to make were all about 2 important things, politics and war. I literally jumped out of bed and ran to my computer and started working on Politics and War, staying up half the night I think. I just knew that this project was going to be the one. And that was right around Christmas of 2013. I remember because I talked my dad into giving me $100 so to buy the domain name and get real web hosting. Over the course of the next year and a half, I started building Politics and War, creating the framework for most of the mechanics you're familiar with today. Cities, improvements, national projects, and most of the core stuff that makes up the game. It was a project that never felt like it would be finished, and I don't think it ever will be. To this day, I still spend a huge chunk of my time working on improving Politics and War, fixing bugs, improving existing mechanics, and adding new features. At the time, I was under some pressure to launch the game officially, and so in July of 2014, I reset the game and we did a speed round, where everyone had 1 month to test all of the game mechanics at an accelerated pace. Then, on August 5th, 2014, the game was officially launched. Everything was reset and everyone started from scratch. The game has continued on from that day over 6 years ago. In that time, I've graduated high school, started college, graduated with a degree in economics from the University of Minnesota, and just recently began graduate school, all while still devoting a large portion of my time to Politics and War. Throughout this whole journey, Politics and War and I have been supported by the donations to the game from players like you. Politics and War is free to play for everyone, and it always will be. I know when I was just a young kid looking for a game where I could create my own country, I didn't have the means to spend money on a game like this. And that's okay. Every player we have adds value to the community and makes the game more fun for everyone. I've also tried to be as careful as possible about making the game pay to win. That's why we have monthly donation limits. While I'm sure that I could get a lot more money by raising or eliminating those limits, I think it would be a huge disservice to the game and the community by letting those with lots of money have an unfair advantage. With the money we have raised, a huge portion of it has been reinvested into the game through better servers, advertising to bring in more new players, and even just recently I was able to bring on a part-time developer to help work on the game. And I will say, she is a far better programmer than I am. So, today, on the first of the month, know that your donation limits have been reset. One way you can support the game is by making a donation. Another way is just by telling your friends about Politics and War and growing our community. Lastly, just know that by playing the game and participating, you are adding to the experience of thousands of other players. I never thought that over 6 years ago when I started Politics and War it would grow to be this large or this successful. Thank you for being a member of the Politics and War community and helping to make the game what it is today.